In a move that has stunned Washington, America's closest allies are planning to literally redraw the map of North American trade. Faced with crippling tariffs from the Trump administration, Canada and Mexico are now developing a radical new trade corridor designed to bypass the United States entirely. It's an audacious plan that threatens to make American tariffs irrelevant and could cost the US economy billions. The world's friendliest neighbors are building a detour around America. How did a trade dispute escalate into a continental rebellion? For 3 decades, the North American economy was governed by a single, revolutionary idea: the continent as one giant factory floor. The North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, erased the economic borders between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. It created the most deeply integrated supply chain in the world, a multi-trillion-dollar ecosystem where a single product could be designed in the US, assembled in Mexico with parts from Canada, and then sold back into the American market. It was a model of efficiency and cooperation built on a bedrock of mutual trust. That trust was obliterated by the Trump administration's America First trade doctrine. The White House viewed this integrated system not as a shared strength, but as a bad deal that had cost American jobs. In a series of aggressive moves, the administration unleashed a barrage of punishing tariffs, with rates as high as 25% to 50% on foundational Canadian industries like steel, aluminum, and automobiles. This wasn't a negotiation, it was economic warfare. Canada, pushed into a corner, fired back, slapping 25% retaliatory tariffs on $30 billion worth of iconic American goods and threatening to escalate that to a staggering $125 billion if the US didn't back down. The situation was thrown into further chaos on May 28, 2025, when a US federal court ruled that the president had exceeded his authority in imposing some of these tariffs, adding a layer of legal uncertainty to the economic conflict. The North American factory floor had become a battleground, forcing America's closest allies to start looking for an emergency exit. The strategy deployed by the Trump administration was a textbook example of economic shock and awe. The White House unleashed a relentless barrage of tariffs, targeting the foundational pillars of the Canadian economy with staggering rates of 25% on steel and up to 50% on aluminum and automobiles. This wasn't a subtle negotiation tactic. It was a sledgehammer designed to inflict maximum pain and force an immediate surrender. The administration's justification was rooted in its America First worldview, which saw the deeply integrated North American supply chain not as a shared asset, but as a system rigged against the United States. President Trump and his advisors argued that for decades, Canada had enjoyed the benefits of open access to the vast US market while using protectionist policies to shield its own industries. The tariffs were framed as a long overdue corrective measure, a way to rebalance the scales and protect American jobs. The underlying belief in Washington was one of absolute leverage. They saw Canada as a dependent nation, a junior partner so thoroughly reliant on American trade that it would have no viable alternative but to capitulate. The strategy was to create a crisis so severe that Canada would have to accept any deal offered. This confidence was thrown into chaos, however, by America's own legal system. On May 28, 2025, a federal court delivered a stunning rebuke, ruling that the president had exceeded his authority by using national emergency powers to impose the so-called Liberation Day tariffs. The ruling declared the levies unlawful and ordered their suspension, plunging the administration's entire trade strategy into legal jeopardy. It was a moment of internal turmoil that revealed the controversial nature of the policy, not just to the world, but within the United States itself. The White House was now fighting a war on 2 fronts, one against its allies and another against its own judicial branch. Faced with what it saw as an existential threat from an unreliable partner, Canada did not fold. It did something far more audacious. After an initial, conventional response, slapping 25% retaliatory tariffs on $30 billion of American goods, Ottawa realized that fighting a tariff war with a much larger economy was a losing battle. So, it decided to change the battlefield entirely. In a move that shocked officials in Washington, Canada began secret negotiations with its other North American partner, Mexico. The goal: to build a new trade alliance designed to make the United States irrelevant to their bilateral relationship. The plan, codenamed the Northern Corridor, was a stroke of geopolitical genius born of desperation. It envisioned a new network of road and sea routes that would allow Canadian goods to travel to Mexico and Mexican goods to Canada without ever touching US soil. The plan was breathtaking in its scope and ambition. With a target signing date of September 2025 and a completion goal of 2028, the two nations were planning to literally redraw the economic map of the continent. But this long-term strategy was paired with immediate tactical countermoves. Canadian aluminum producers, facing a 50% US tariff, didn't wait. They immediately pivoted, diverting over 100,000 tons of product away from the US and toward new markets in Europe. In other sectors, Canadian businesses found clever ways to use the existing USMCA rules against the US. The chocolate industry provided a perfect example. Canadian companies could still export raw chocolate materials to the US tariff-free, while American chocolatiers like Hershey were suddenly hit with new tariffs of 10 to 25% on the cacao they imported from other countries. At the same time, Canada launched a campaign of internal fortification, aggressively moving to dismantle its own interprovincial trade barriers to boost domestic commerce, a move projected to increase its own GDP by nearly 4%. This, combined with the popular Buy Canadian movement, was a clear strategy. If the US wanted to build a wall, Canada would build a detour. This has created a high-stakes continental standoff. The United States is now faced with a humiliating prospect. Its primary weapon, tariffs, is at risk of becoming obsolete. The Northern Corridor, if completed, threatens to deprive the US of an estimated $69 billion in tariff revenue and an additional $56 billion in indirect economic benefits and job losses over the next 5 years, with the American Midwest absorbing the heaviest blow. The White House is caught in a trap of its own making. To double down on tariffs now would only accelerate its allies' push to complete the bypass. To back down would be a stunning admission of defeat. For Canada and Mexico, the corridor is a monumental gamble. It's a costly, long-term project born from a short-term crisis. They are betting that they can endure the economic pain of the current trade war long enough to build a new, more independent future. The three nations are no longer just partners in trade. They are rivals in a race to define the future of the North American economy. Nowhere was the shock of the American tariffs felt more intensely than in Canada's aluminum industry. For generations, these smelters in Quebec and British Columbia existed for one primary reason: to feed the voracious appetite of American manufacturing. The US was not just their biggest customer, it was their only customer of significance. So when the White House slapped a crippling 50% tariff on their product, it wasn't just a trade dispute, it was an existential threat. The move was designed to bring the industry to its knees, but it didn't. In a stunning display of agility, Canadian producers executed a breathtaking pivot. Instead of shutting down, they turned their backs on the US market and aggressively sought new buyers. In a matter of months, they successfully redirected over 100,000 tons of aluminum to new markets in Europe, completely bypassing the American tariffs. This spirit of defiant innovation is now rippling across the Canadian economy. The US trade war has become a catalyst for a great internal re-engineering. Faced with a hostile neighbor, Canada has finally found the political will to tackle a problem that has plagued it for decades: its own internal trade barriers. The provinces are now aggressively moving to dismantle the red tape that made it easier to trade with Michigan than with Manitoba. new laws allowing for the direct shipment of alcohol between provinces, set to be implemented by 2026, are just the beginning of a push projected to boost Canada's internal GDP by nearly 4%. This, combined with the powerful grassroots Buy Canadian movement, represents a fundamental shift. The cost of this confrontation is real, measured in lost contracts and the immense logistical challenge of rewiring an entire economy. But the crisis has also forced Canada to become stronger, more self-reliant, and less dependent on a partner it can no longer trust. The tariffs were supposed to protect iconic American companies like Hershey. Instead, they have ensnared them in a web of unintended consequences, putting them at a direct disadvantage against their Canadian competitors. The paradox lies in the intricate rules of trade. While the US imposes tariffs of 10 to 25% on raw materials like cacao imported from outside North America, Canadian chocolate makers have cleverly used the existing USMCA framework to source ingredients and export finished materials back into the US largely tariff-free. The result is a strategic nightmare for American chocolatiers. A policy designed to punish Canada is now punishing Pennsylvania, making American-made chocolate more expensive to produce than its Canadian equivalent. It's a case of friendly fire in a trade war that is hitting home. But the damage to a few companies is nothing compared to the catastrophic economic threat posed by the Northern Corridor. This Canada-Mexico bypass is a direct response to American aggression, and its potential cost to the United States is staggering. Projections estimate the US could lose up to $69 billion in tariff revenue over the next 5 years. Add to that another $17 billion in lost indirect benefits and $39 billion in job losses, and the total economic damage exceeds $125 billion. The pain would not be felt evenly. The industrial heartland of the Midwest, a region crucial to the US supply chain, is projected to suffer a GDP decline of as much as 2.8%. The tariffs, intended to be a show of American strength, have provoked a continental rebellion that threatens to isolate the US economy, starve it of revenue, and inflict deep, lasting damage on the very regions it was supposed to protect. A trade war launched to display American dominance has instead sparked a continental rebellion. In a stunning countermove, Canada and Mexico are forging a new alliance, planning a massive trade corridor designed to bypass the United States entirely. The gambit threatens to shatter a century of partnership, render US tariffs irrelevant, and isolate the American economy from its two most essential partners. The continent has reached a breaking point. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will both nations lose by trying to go it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.